Good morning. Welcome to today's story, a touching, humane, and educational tale.
By the time the people of Bitter Creek finally climbed the mountain and begged a 15-year-old orphan to open her door, the storm had already swallowed the roads, the power, and every cruel word they had ever thrown at her. But long before that night, Eliza Quinn had learned something most grown men never do. When the world gives you no home, you build one with your own hands, and pray it will be enough when the cold comes for everyone. This story is about resilience, quiet wisdom, and the kind of courage that grows in lonely places. It shows how preparation, humility, and compassion can turn the most overlooked person into the one a whole town needs. In Bitter Creek, Montana, people noticed everything. They noticed who left their porch light on past midnight. They noticed which truck rolled down Main Street before sunrise. They noticed who was late to church, who was behind on feed bills, and who kept to themselves a little too much. So, of course, they noticed Eliza Quinn. She was 15 years old, an orphan, and not from around there. No one could quite say where she had come from before the county brought her in. Some said Idaho, some said Wyoming. A few claimed she had already been through 3 foster homes in 2 years. By the time winter settled over Bitter Creek, folks had shaped her story into whatever made the best conversation over coffee. But the truth was simpler than the rumors, and sadder too. Eliza had learned young that a place could feed you, shelter you, even give you a bed for a while, and still never feel like home. She had spent enough time being temporarily placed to understand what that word really meant. It meant not unpacking too much. It meant not expecting anyone to come looking if you disappeared. It meant learning how to take up as little space as possible. Then she came to Bitter Creek, and somehow, even there, she remained what she had always been, a girl from somewhere else. By January, most of the town knew only 3 things about her. She lived up on the ridge in an old limestone cave. She had a gray and white husky mix named Coda who followed her everywhere. And she looked people in the eye just long enough to let them know she was listening, then walked away before they could decide whether to pity her or judge her. That alone was enough to make folks uneasy. Every Thursday, Eliza came down into town for supplies: flour, salt, lamp oil, dried beans, sometimes nails, sometimes twine, sometimes seed packets that made no sense to buy in the dead of winter, unless a person knew something other people did not. She never wandered, never bought candy, never stood around the stove at Bell's General Store to listen to gossip. She came in with cold on her coat and purpose in her step, Coda waiting outside by the hitching rail, and she left the same way. Martha Bell, who owned the store, was one of the few people in town who saw more than the surface. Martha was in her 60s, soft-spoken but sharp, with flour on her apron and a way of watching people that made them tell the truth without realizing it. She had noticed Eliza's careful manners, the way she always counted exact change, the way she said yes ma'am and no sir, even to people who didn't deserve the courtesy. One Thursday afternoon, Eliza laid 2 sacks of flour, a tin of matches, and a small bottle of iodine on the counter. "You need anything else, sweetheart?" Martha asked gently. Eliza shook her head. "No, ma'am, that'll do." From beside the pickle barrel, Wade Mercer let out a dry laugh. Wade owned a cattle ranch east of town and considered it his duty to say out loud whatever crossed his mind, especially if it made someone smaller than him uncomfortable. "That enough to last a week," he said. "Or are you stocking that cave for the second coming?" A few men chuckled into their coffee. Nolan Briggs, the mechanic, leaned back on his stool. "Maybe the dog's the one eating better than the rest of us." More laughter. Eliza didn't answer right away. She kept counting her money, 1 coin, then another. Calm, steady, like the sound of them didn't land anywhere inside her. But after a second, she lifted her head and said quietly, "Coda earns his keep better than most people do." The store fell still. It was only a sentence, softly spoken, no drama in it, but it landed. Wade gave a bark of laughter, though there was less confidence in it now. "Well, look at that. Mountain girl's got a little fire in her after all." Martha shot him a hard look. "That's enough." Eliza slid the money across the counter, thanked Martha, and gathered her things. As she turned, something slipped from the inside pocket of her coat. Just for a second, a worn photograph. Martha caught only a glimpse before Eliza tucked it away. A little boy, maybe 7 or 8, bright smile, windblown hair, summer light. Not a brother anyone in Bitter Creek had ever seen. Not a face Martha forgot. Outside, the afternoon sky stretched low and heavy over town, the kind of gray that made the church's steeple look darker and the mountains feel closer. Coda rose at once when Eliza stepped onto the boardwalk. He pressed briefly against her leg before falling into step beside her, quiet and alert. The road out of town climbed past frozen fence lines, bare cottonwoods and fields lying flat beneath old snow. Eliza did not look back. She rarely did. By the time she reached the ridge, the wind had changed. That was the first thing she noticed. Not stronger, not yet, but sharper, colder, intentional. Coda stopped near the entrance of the cave and looked down toward the valley, ears raised, body suddenly still. Eliza followed his gaze. Below them, Bitter Creek looked small and settled, smoke rising from chimneys, windows glowing warm against the early dark. It looked safe, ordinary, certain of itself. But Eliza had lived long enough to distrust anything that looked too certain. She stepped inside the cave she had turned into a life. Shelves lined with jars, blankets folded with care, lantern light catching on green leaves growing under salvaged glass, the whisper of running water through stone. It wasn't much by most people's standards, but it was hers. And as the first breath of the coming storm moved through the pines outside, Eliza Quinn stood very still in the gathering dark, with Coda beside her, and felt that old, familiar warning rise in her chest. Something was coming, and down in the valley, the people who laughed at her had no idea. That night, the wind kept working at the mountain. Not hard enough to frighten most people yet, not loud enough to wake the whole valley, just steady, cold, patient, the kind of wind that seemed to know exactly where every weakness was. Inside the cave, Eliza moved through her evening chores with the quiet rhythm of someone who had learned that routine could calm almost anything. She hung her coat by the entrance to dry. She checked the lantern glass. She measured out feed for the trout in the narrow stone channel at the back, then crouched beside the winter greens growing under the salvaged panes of glass. The spinach looked strong. The lettuce had held its color. The small row of carrots she had started in a deeper bed of soil would need another layer of burlap before the temperature dropped any further. Coda stayed close, watching her with those pale, intelligent eyes of his. He was usually relaxed once they were inside. He would circle twice near the blankets, settle down by the warm stones, and let the mountain do whatever it planned to do outside. But not that night. That night, he kept lifting his head, kept listening. Eliza noticed it without needing to think about it. By now, she trusted Coda the way some people trusted church bells or weather radios. He knew things before the sky admitted them. She crossed to the mouth of the cave and stood still. The air had changed again. The cold felt sharper now, less like winter and more like warning. The clouds had thickened over the valley, turning the last light into a dull iron gray. Even the pines below seemed quieter, as though the whole ridge were holding its breath. Eliza stepped back inside and closed the heavy canvas she had rigged across the entrance. Then she got to work. She filled 2 extra kettles with water and set them near the heat stones. She checked the stacked firewood, then counted the jars on the shelf without really looking at them. Beans, corn, tomatoes, dried apples, salted venison. Martha Bell had once slipped into her bag and pretended she had paid for. Flour, rice, enough for a while if she was careful. Enough for 1 girl and 1 dog. Maybe more, if it came to that. She didn't let herself sit with that thought for long. Instead, she pulled a folded notebook from beneath the wooden crate that served as her table. It had once belonged to her father. His handwriting filled the pages in dark, slanted lines. Weather notes, planting dates, sketches of drainage, ideas for storing warmth underground. Most people would have seen a pile of rough notes from a man who had never stayed in one place long enough to be respected. Eliza saw a map, a way to survive. She ran her fingers over a page where he had written, "Watch the wind before the snow. Snow lies. Wind tells the truth first." Her throat tightened just a little. She closed the notebook and reached into her coat pocket. The photograph came out worn and soft at the edges, the way paper gets after being held too often. A little boy with a crooked grin and summer hair, sunlight all around him. Noah. For a moment, the cave was very still. Eliza sat on the edge of her cot and looked at him the way she always did when the air turned dangerous. "You would have liked Coda," she whispered. Coda lifted his head at the sound of her voice, then came over and rested his chin on her knee. Noah had never seen this cave, never seen the shelves or the lantern light or the glass panels that caught warmth even in winter. He had never seen the place Eliza had built with stubborn hands and a heart that refused to trust the world again. But in some quiet way, every board, every stone, Every jar she had stacked in neat rows had been built in conversation with him. Because before Bitter Creek, before the ridge, before the cave felt like a home, there had been another winter, another place, another storm no one had taken seriously until it was too late, and a little boy who had not made it through the cold. Eliza did not let the memory go further than that. Not tonight. She slid the photograph back into her pocket and stood. Coda's ears twitched. Then came the sound. Not thunder, not yet. Just the long, low groan of wind pressing through the trees and down the rock face. Eliza turned toward the entrance. By morning, she knew the roads would be bad. By tomorrow night, maybe worse. Bitter Creek would do what towns like Bitter Creek always did. Men would say they had seen harder winters. Women would pull children indoors and hope the power held. Folks would wait too long to admit they were not ready. She hated how certain she felt about that. The next morning, she came down into town earlier than usual. The clouds were lower now, the air bitter enough to sting her lungs. Coda padded beside her through the frozen ruts of the road, his thick coat dusted white at the tips. Bell's General Store was already open. Martha looked up as Eliza entered, and something in her face changed right away. "You're early," Martha said. Eliza set 2 empty grain sacks on the counter. "I need lamp oil, extra salt, any burlap you can spare." Martha didn't ask why. She simply nodded and turned to gather the things. But Wade Mercer, standing by the stove with Nolan Briggs and a cup of coffee in his hand, heard every word. "What's the rush, Mountain Girl?" he asked. "You expectin' the Lord himself to blow through town?" Eliza looked at him then, steady and serious. "I think this storm's going to hit harder than people think," she said. "You should bring in extra wood. Check on the older folks, and keep children close to home tomorrow." For once, her voice carried no sharpness at all, only certainty. Wade smirked. Nolan rolled his eyes into his coffee. A couple of men exchanged amused glances. "Listen to that," Wade said. 15 years old and already giving winter advice to people who've lived here their whole lives. Martha did not smile. Eliza stood there for one quiet second, taking in the room, the stove heat, the safe little sounds of people who still believed they had time. Then she nodded once. "All right," she said softly. She picked up her supplies, called for Coda, and stepped back out into the cold. Behind her, the bell over the store door gave one thin ring. Ahead of her, the wind was rising. And somewhere deep inside, in that part of her shaped by grief and sharpened by memory, Eliza Quinn already knew something the rest of Bitter Creek had not learned yet. By the time they were ready to be afraid, the mountain would already be closing in. By nightfall, Bitter Creek was gone. Not gone in the way towns disappear from maps. Gone in the way a blizzard erases edges, distances, and good judgment all at once. The road vanished first, then the fence lines, then the low barn roofs at the bottom of the valley, until everything beyond the ridge looked like it had been swallowed by one endless sheet of white. Inside the cave, Eliza kept moving. That was how she handled fear. Not by naming it, by giving her hands something useful to do. She checked the canvas at the entrance and tightened the rope at the lower hooks. She fed more heat into the stone bed she had built along the back wall. She set a kettle near the coals, laid out 2 extra blankets, and placed a lantern on the crate beside her cot in case the wind worsened and she needed both hands free. Coda paced near the entrance. Not restless, alert. Every so often, he would stop, lift his head, and stare toward the canvas as if he could see through stone and snow both. Eliza noticed it, but she said nothing. Outside, the storm dragged its weight across the mountain with a deep, grinding sound. Snow hissed against the rock. Wind pressed through the pines in long, mournful waves that made the whole ridge feel alive and uneasy. She had just knelt to pull another blanket from a shelf when Coda froze. Not paused, froze. His ears shot up. His body went stiff. Then he let out a low sound deep in his chest and lunged toward the entrance. Eliza stood at once. "Coda." He scratched once at the canvas, then looked back at her. That look was enough. Eliza's heartbeat changed, fast, sharp, certain. She threw on her coat, grabbed the lantern, then stopped and set it back down. The wind would kill the flame in seconds. Instead, she took the storm flashlight she kept wrapped in cloth near the shelf, shoved her hands into dry gloves, and pulled the canvas aside. Snow slammed into her face so hard it nearly stole her breath. "Coda!" But he was already moving, a blur of gray and white against the dark. Eliza ducked her head and followed. The cold hit like a living thing. It clawed at her cheeks, drove needles into her lungs, and swallowed sound before it could travel more than a few feet. She could barely see the path she knew by heart. The ridge had become a shifting wall of white and shadow, the world reduced to wind, snow, and instinct. Ahead of her, Coda stopped, barked once, then veered left toward a stand of bent pines. Eliza fought her way after him, boots sinking past her ankles, one hand shielding her face, the other gripping the flashlight low against the storm. The beam cut through the snow in short, useless bursts. Then she saw it, something small at the base of a tree, a shape half covered in drift. For one terrible second, her whole body locked. Noah. The thought came so fast it hurt. Then Coda barked again, sharp and urgent, and the world snapped back into focus. It wasn't Noah. It was a boy. No more than 8, maybe 9. Curled on his side beneath the pine, coat open at the neck, one glove missing, lashes crusted with snow. His lips were pale. His skin had gone that frightening color that belonged nowhere near childhood. "Oh, honey," Eliza breathed, dropping to her knees. The boy's eyes fluttered but did not open. She brushed snow from his face with clumsy gloves and leaned close enough to hear the faintest thread of breath. Alive. Barely. "Eliza," she whispered to herself, forcing her mind to hold steady. "Move." She stripped off her scarf and wrapped it around the boy's head and neck. Then she shrugged out of her own outer coat and pulled it over his chest as best she could. He was lighter than he should have been, all angles and winter layers, and frighteningly limp when she lifted him. Coda stayed close, circling once, then pressing against Eliza's side as if to shield what little warmth they had left. "It's okay," she said, though she did not know whether she was speaking to the boy, the dog, or herself. "I've got you. I've got you." The walk back to the cave felt longer than any road Eliza had ever traveled. She slipped twice, once hard enough to drive one knee into buried stone. The boy never woke. Snow packed into her sleeves. Her fingers began to burn and then go numb. Coda kept running ahead, then back, never straying far, never letting her lose the line of the ridge. When the dark shape of the cave finally rose through the storm, Eliza nearly cried from relief. Inside, she laid the boy on the cot and worked fast. Wet coat off, boots off, socks peeled away with careful hands. His feet were icy, his fingers worse. She wrapped him in dry blankets, tucked warm stones at a safe distance near his legs, and poured hot water into a mug to let steam rise near his face. Coda jumped onto the floor beside the cot without being told and pressed himself along the boy's side, a living wall of heat. "Come on," Eliza whispered, kneeling beside him. "Come back, stay with me." After a long moment, the boy shuddered, then coughed, then drew in one thin, ragged breath that sounded to Eliza like the answer to a prayer she had been afraid to speak out loud. His eyes opened halfway. He looked around the cave in confusion, at the lantern light, the stone ceiling, the green leaves under glass. The husky curled against him. Then his gaze found Eliza. Her face was still red from the storm. Her hair had come loose. Snow melted down the shoulders of her sweater. She must have looked more like a wild thing than a girl. But when she spoke, her voice was low and warm. "You're safe," she said. "You're safe now." The boy blinked once, then whispered through chattering teeth, Is this your house?" Eliza looked around the cave, at the shelves, the blankets, the lantern glow, Coda standing watch. Then she looked back at him. "Yet," she said softly, "it is." And outside, the storm kept building, as if the mountain already knew that before morning, the whole town would come looking for the child she had carried out of the snow. By morning, the storm had turned mean. Not loud in the dramatic way people imagine storms in stories. Mean in the real way. The kind that buried truck doors shut, bent porch rails under the weight of snow, and made even the oldest men in Bitter Creek step outside, look at the sky, and go back in without saying much. In the cave, the boy slept hard beneath the blankets. His name, Eliza had learned sometime before dawn, was Ben Carter. 8 years old, freckles across his nose, a missing front tooth, and just enough strength, once the heat and tea had done their work, to whisper that he had gone looking for the barn dog after supper and lost sight of the porch light in the blowing snow. Then he had cried a little from exhaustion, not fear. That was what broke Eliza's heart. Children never cried for the thing people expected, not when they were truly scared. Coda had not left his side for more than a minute at a time. Now and then the dog would rise, walk to the entrance, listen, and come back again, as if keeping watch over two worlds at once. Eliza stood near the mouth of the cave, one hand on the heavy canvas, listening to the wind drag itself over the ridge. If Ben had been gone all night, the town would be looking for him. That thought tightened everything inside her. Not because she was afraid of being found, not exactly, but because people who had laughed at the idea of her mountain life would soon walk into the one place she had built with her own hands, the only place in the world that felt earned, the only place that had ever felt like hers, and somehow that felt frightening too. A little after noon, Coda's ears went up. He gave one sharp bark, then another. Eliza stilled. At first, she heard only wind. Then faintly beneath it, voices, several of them far off, strained, calling a child's name. Ben! The sound came again, broken by the storm. Ben Carter! Eliza closed her eyes for half a second. Then she tied her scarf, pulled on her gloves, and lifted the canvas. The snow outside was still falling, though lighter now, and through it she could make out shapes moving up the ridge. 3 men, 2 women, heavy coats, bent heads, one of them carrying a rope, another holding a lantern in broad daylight, like hope had become more important than pride. When they spotted her standing at the cave entrance, the whole group stopped. For one strange second, nobody moved. Then a woman broke from the line and stumbled toward her. "Where is he?" she cried, her voice raw and thin with panic. "Please, if you've seen my boy—" "He's alive," Eliza said quickly. "He's inside. He's warm." The woman made a sound that was almost a sob and pushed past her. The others followed. Martha Bell came first, her cheeks red from the cold, breath coming hard. Behind her was Nolan Briggs, white with snow and silence. Wade Mercer was there too, his jaw set in a way Eliza had never seen before. And with them came Claire Dawson, the middle school teacher, steady and wide-eyed under a knit cap pulled low over her brow. Then they all stepped inside and stopped. Eliza had seen people react to the cave before, but never like this. It was not disgust, not mockery, not even simple surprise. It was the stunned quiet that comes when the story you told yourself about someone falls apart all at once. Lantern light glowed against limestone walls. Shelves held rows of carefully labeled jars. Blankets were folded with military precision. The winter greens under the salvaged glass shone a clear, living green in the warm light. Water moved softly through the stone channel at the back. Heat rose from the bed of warmed rock near the cot where Ben lay, blinking awake. Ben's mother rushed to him and dropped to her knees. "Oh, baby," she whispered, gathering him up as gently as she could. "Oh, honey." Ben clung to her, still weak, and pointed toward Eliza. "She found me," he said. His voice was scratchy but clear. "Well, Coda found me. Then she did." His mother turned, eyes full of tears, and looked at Eliza like she was seeing her for the first time. "Thank you," she said, the words barely holding together. "Thank you." Eliza nodded once, uncomfortable under the weight of it. Behind her, no one else spoke. Wade Mercer stood beside the shelf of canned goods, staring as if the jars themselves had offended his understanding of the world. Nolan looked at the stone heating bed, then at the glass-covered greens, and then at Eliza with something close to shame. Claire Dawson's eyes moved slowly over every detail, taking in the practical intelligence of it all, and her expression softened into something deeper than surprise. Martha Bell was the one who noticed the photograph. It sat half-tucked near Eliza's notebook on the crate table, probably left there in the rush of the night. A little boy in summer light, a bright smile, wind-blown hair. Martha looked at it, then at Eliza. "Who is he?" she asked quietly. The cave seemed to grow smaller around that question. Eliza's fingers tightened at her sides. For a moment, she said nothing. Outside, wind pressed against the canvas in a long, low sweep. Inside, Ben's breathing steadied. Coda sat beside the cot, watchful and still. At last, Eliza walked over to the table and picked up the photograph. "My brother," she said. Her voice was calm, but only because she had spent a long time teaching it how to be. "Noah." No one interrupted. Eliza looked down at the picture for one long second before lifting her eyes again. "He died in a storm like this one." The words landed softly, but they landed hard. Claire's hand came up to her mouth. Martha lowered her gaze. Wade did not move at all. Eliza swallowed and went on. Because once the truth had opened, there was no point trying to force it shut again. "We were somewhere else then. Different town, different winter. People said it wouldn't get as bad as the forecast claimed. Said we'd be fine if we stayed put and waited it out." She paused. "We weren't." Her voice thinned on the last 2 words just for a breath. Then she steadied it. "I built this place because I never wanted to stand in the cold again, wishing I had done more." No one in the cave had an answer for that. And as the storm deepened outside, the people of Bitter Creek stood in the warmth of the 15-year-old girl they had laughed at, and began one by one to understand exactly who she had been all along. For a long moment, no one in the cave said anything. The wind scraped across the mountain. The lantern flame trembled. Ben Carter rested against his mother's coat, pale but alive, with Coda still sitting close as if the boy were under his protection now. Then Martha Bell stepped forward. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "Eliza," she said softly, "you saved that child." Eliza looked down at the photograph still in her hand. For a second, she seemed younger than 15, not because she was weak, but because grief had a way of showing the child inside a person, no matter how hard life had forced them to grow. "I just did what needed doing," she said. That was when Wade Mercer finally found his voice. He cleared his throat once, rubbed a gloved hand across his jaw, and glanced around the cave as if he still could not quite believe what he was seeing. The greens under glass, the stacked jars, the warmth rising from stone, the order, the foresight, the life. "I was wrong about you," he said. The words came rough, like they had to fight their way out of a man who was not used to saying them. Eliza lifted her eyes but said nothing. Wade nodded once, almost to himself. "Truth is," he went on, "I think a lot of us were." Outside, the storm deepened again before anyone could decide what to do next. Nolan moved to the cave entrance and pulled back the canvas just enough to look out. Snow whipped sideways through the gap. He let the canvas fall shut and turned back with a face gone tight. "The lower road's buried," he said. "And if that wind keeps up, the east side of town's going to lose power before dark." Claire Dawson drew in a slow breath. "That means the Millers will be stuck," she said. "And Mrs. Grady? And the Holcomb baby's already been sick." A new silence filled the cave then. This one was different. Not the silence of shame, the silence of realization. Everyone in that room understood the same thing at once. Bitter Creek was not ready. Not for this storm, not for another night of it, and certainly not for the cold that would settle in once the lights went out and the woodpiles ran low. Ben's mother held her son tighter. Martha looked toward the shelves of canned food. Claire's gaze moved over the cave again, this time not with surprise, but with the sharp, practical attention of a teacher counting what might save lives. Wade turned back to Eliza. "How many people could fit in here?" he asked. Eliza's heart gave one hard beat. The cave had always been more than shelter. It was the one place she had built with her own hands. The one place no county worker had assigned her to. No foster parent had offered for a season. No stranger had claimed to know what was best for her. Every shelf, every blanket, every stone of warmth, it was hers. And now the town wanted in. She looked at Coda. He stood and came to her side, calm and quiet, as if he already knew the answer she was trying to find. Eliza turned toward the entrance and listened to the storm. Then she pictured children in dark houses, old people with failing heat, mothers boiling the last water they had, men pretending they could handle one more night because pride always lasted longer than good sense. She thought of Noah, and she knew. "As many as we make room for," she said. Everything changed after that. Fast. Wade and Nolan headed back down with rope, lanterns, and a plan to bring up whoever needed warmth first. Claire went with them, promising to check the families with children and the elderly before anyone else. Martha stayed behind with Ben and his mother to help Eliza prepare the cave. They worked side by side without ceremony. Blankets were unrolled. The extra kettles were filled. The warm stone bed was widened with bricks Nolan had once laughed at Eliza for hauling up the ridge. Martha opened jars and set food aside for soup. Ben, wrapped in blankets, watched all of it with wide, sleepy eyes, as if he had wandered into a story nobody would believe at school on Monday. By late afternoon, they began to arrive. Mrs. Grady came first, shivering beneath 2 coats, then the Millers with their twin girls, then the Holcombs carrying their feverish baby. After that came others, faces red from cold and humility alike, stepping into the cave with snow on their boots and astonishment in their eyes. No one laughed now. No one called her strange. They simply came in, lowered their voices, and followed Eliza's instructions. "Put the wet gloves there. Keep the little ones near the warm stones. Don't crowd the entrance. Pass the water carefully. Leave room for more." And she gave those instructions clearly, naturally, like she had been waiting her whole life to be useful in exactly this way. At one point, Wade stood near the back wall, watching families settle beneath blankets while steam rose from the soup kettle. He looked over at Eliza and said quietly this time, "You built all this at 15. Eliza shook her head a little. "I built it because I had to." Wade's eyes moved across the cave, then back to her. "Maybe," he said, "but a lot of people have to survive hard things. Not all of them turn that pain into something that saves other folks." That stayed with her, long after the soup had been passed around, long after the baby stopped crying, long after the cave filled with the low human sounds of people warming back into themselves. For the first time since coming to Bitter Creek, Eliza did not feel like a girl from somewhere else. She felt rooted, not because the mountain belonged to her alone anymore, but because she had opened the one safe place she had, and instead of losing it, she had finally found what it meant to share it. So let me ask you something. How often do we laugh at the quiet person, only to discover they were carrying the wisdom, the courage, and the heart we would one day need? That night, while the storm raged outside, the town of Bitter Creek slept inside the warmth a 15-year-old orphan had built from grief, grit, and love. And by morning, no one called Eliza Quinn strange anymore. They called her the girl who saved them. If this story moved you, stay with me for the next one. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who needs a little hope, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were Eliza?